That's the side that I choose to err on when it comes to the tariff stuff. It's like, if it doesn't work, what the fuck? What do we lose?
The global trade war that Donald Trump promised during his campaign and recently started is a serious matter that is already causing problems and will cause increasingly worse problems the longer it goes on. When you justify your support for something as serious as a global trade war with a question like, what do we have to lose if it doesn't work? I think you should at least answer that question. So let's. Trump initiated a global trade war by placing a blanket 10% tax on all imports, also known as a tariff, with even higher rates for imports from countries running a trade surplus with the United States. That means if a business in the United States imports $100 worth of goods, it pays $10 to the US government when it receives those goods. It's like a sales tax. If you buy $100 worth of stuff at the store and there's a 6% sales tax in your state, you will see an extra $6 charge at checkout that goes to your state government. And to use that analogy to put the size of these tariffs into perspective, if a state passed a 10% sales tax, it would be the highest sales tax in the country. Only in this case, it's on everything we import, and 10% is the minimum, except of course for the handful of countries he exempted from the tariffs, like Russia, because that'll beat the allegations. The trade war has increased the average tariff to 27%, the highest level in over 100 years, with the highest baseline tariff being 145% on China, our third largest trading partner. The stated goal? To grow the U.S. economy and raise incomes by onshoring jobs, especially in industries like mining and manufacturing. So let's look at what's at stake if the trade war doesn't work, if it fails to grow the economy and boost incomes. Most credible projections suggest that the tariffs will reduce economic growth and raise consumer prices. The Yale Budget Lab and Peterson Institute project that tariffs will shave 0.5 to 0.9% off economic growth this year alone, with continued drag on growth going forward. We already saw the economy shrink 0.3% in the first quarter. The economy grew about 3% per year under Biden. So if you're among the people who thought the economy was bad under Biden, imagine it being 15 to 30% worse. Employment would shrink by about 740,000 jobs by the end of 2025, raising unemployment by 0.5 to 0.6 percentage points. For comparison, 2.23 million jobs were added to the economy in 2024, so just erase a third of that. The average American income will lose $2,000 to $3,800 in purchasing power per year, and income adjusted for inflation, which has been climbing for 3 years, over 10 years if you take out the pandemic recession, would drop by about 1.2%. Farmers will be among the hardest hit. Over 20% of U.S. farm output is exported, making them prime targets for retaliation. China has already stopped importing many U.S. agricultural goods, and the European Union is planning counter tariffs on food products like bourbon and dairy. Export volumes could drop by 8 to 66% depending on the market, so farmers face collapsing export demand, lower commodity prices, and the threat of bankruptcy without government bailouts, repeating the cycle seen during Trump's trade wars in 2018 and 2019, which were significantly smaller than what we're seeing today. Export-driven industries like aerospace, machinery, and automotive are also on the chopping block. Exports in these sectors are projected to drop by 16%. That will affect not just the companies shipping overseas, but every supplier in the chain. Businesses will close and people will lose jobs. Manufacturers who rely on imported materials will also suffer. Costs will go up and competitiveness will go down. Clothing is expected to rise 17%, and electronics like smartphones 40%. Some products may disappear from shelves altogether. We've yet to start feeling the full impact of the trade war since businesses are still using existing inventory, but import bookings have already dropped 64%. More than half of the goods scheduled to arrive in the US just won't. That's something that will take time and be expensive to remediate, even if Trump decides to cancel the tariffs today and every country he targeted decides to let bygones be bygones. Tariffs have already triggered retaliation from key trade partners like China, Canada, and the EU, all of whom are targeting up to $330 billion in US exports for retaliation retaliation. Canada even announced that they'll hit red states harder because those states voted for Trump in his trade war, and trade wars aren't just about balance sheets, they're political. What's worse is these tariffs didn't distinguish between adversaries and allies. In fact, some of our worst adversaries were exempted from them altogether, while countries like Japan, South Korea, and Canada were treated like enemies. That sends a message: the US can't be trusted, which has consequences. We risk protracted multi-front trade wars that undermine trust and make cooperation on global challenges like sanctions, security, and climate much harder. And you can't blame them. Trump attacked their economies without provocation. They will want to make a point. This is how you have to deal with bullies. But what about the potential upside? Look, the truth is that the promised benefits of the trade war are a mirage. There are nearly 500,000 open jobs in U.S. manufacturing today. If demand for manufacturing work was as high as proponents of the trade war claim it is, it stands to reason that those numbers would be much lower. Meanwhile, in China, where our jobs supposedly went, factory workers earn about $4 an hour. Bringing those jobs back would mean higher costs and higher prices anyway, and companies will try to keep wages as low as possible to stay as competitive as possible. That's if the jobs come back at all, and most of them won't. They'll be automated. China's already moving towards dark factories, or fully automated factories with a few human workers to maintain the robots. In short, there's little reason to believe the trade war will create more jobs than it will destroy. The jobs that do come back are unlikely to be as high paying as people seem to think they'll be, and the demand for them isn't that high to begin with. And deep down, Americans do seem to know this already. A recent Gallup poll found that while 80% of people said we'd be better off if more Americans were working manufacturing, only 25% of them said they would be better off with one of those jobs. That's not genuine labor market demand, it's nostalgia dressed up as policy. So to answer the question, what do we have to lose if the trade war fails? A lot. Economic growth, jobs, purchasing power, trade opportunities, international trust, and global stability. And what do we have to gain? Almost nothing. This is akin to looking at a house that needs a new roof and deciding that the best fix is to light it on fire. Not because the person in charge is a roofer, but because the person in charge is an arsonist, and lighting things on fire is their answer to everything. People don't really want or need more factory or mining jobs. They want more jobs that offer medium income wages without a college degree. That can be done, but it requires strategic policy solutions that rely on long-term investment and cooperation between the executive and legislative branches of government that endures even when the majority party changes. Republicans aren't interested in that because their economic policy is predicated on cutting taxes for rich people and reducing labor power, and Donald Trump definitely isn't interested in it because he can't personally profit from it, and it doesn't make him more powerful. So instead, he lies to voters about simplistic solutions based on a nostalgic misrepresentation of a time when those jobs were supposedly plentiful, and he blames our problems on foreigners, just like populist demagogues always do while they consolidate power and enrich themselves. Trump's trade war, like all his endeavors, is a con. He tells people like Theo Vaughn that they have nothing to lose because he can trust that they won't check to see whether he's lying, and he can trust that they're not paying close enough attention to notice while he picks their pockets.